the floof is right here. And I'm here. I guess I'll start with, I don't know if you've heard about the rules change that YouTube is going to implement in January about videos aimed at children. And I should not be affected by that because, well, for one thing, I don't monetize. I don't make any money off of this. For another thing, I'm pretty sure a lot of people who watch my videos are my age or older, or at least really close to my age, you know, legal adults and how. But I don't know if the algorithms might say, oh, those are dolls. Dolls are children things. Things that children are bad. Or I don't know if I'll be affected by it or not. I shouldn't, because, like I said, I don't do kids' toy stuff. I do grown-ups with spare time and the ability to afford and use a Dremel and caustic chemicals like acetone and airbrush, and I'm not about going off to the store and buying the latest, greatest, brand new doll. I'm about going to the thrift store or somebody else going to the thrift store and we all share doll parts and put them together to make new dolls and customize them and reroute them. And it's the adult version of the hobby, which, yes, kids can do it, but this isn't aimed at kids. So that's all I have to talk about. Thanks. Now, I've been doing research into making shoes for dolls, and a lot of people have given me nice links, but I think you don't get how stubborn I am. When I'm going to make when I say I'm going to make shoes for dolls, I mean I'm going to make real shoes, just miniature for doll size. So I've been looking at websites. There are a lot of people out there who make their own human-sized shoes. So you can see all the steps it takes. Hey, Floof, am I talking too loud? All the steps it takes to use like a last and to sew the upper completely together, and then how you form it around the last and glue it in place and put the reinforcements inside the shoe so it doesn't lose its shape when there's no foot in it. And that's what I'm going to do for dolls. Maybe. My biggest hold up with making shoes for dolls is not sewing the uppers together, because honestly, I can do that. I have done that 15 years ago. Okay, I used to be more in the action figure community than the doll community. That's before dolls really had a lot of articulation, so since I was all about the articulation, I was into female action figures. There was a brand of female action, well, Takara Japan made some action figures called Cool Girls in Japan and Psy Girls in the US. One of the defining characteristics of Psy Girls, Cool Girls, CGs, was they didn't have real feet. They had what we, who customized, called boot feet, which was this shoe-shaped thing. It was not foot-shaped, it was shoe-shaped, so it had like the room for the toes and everything in that shoes have. And it had a sole that was held on with a screw. And then to go over the boot foot and to get trapped in place, clipped in place with the sole plate, was something that we called a boot sleeve, which is basically a baggy sock-shaped piece of vinyl that you'd put over the boot foot and then clamp in place with the sole plate, and then it would look like they were wearing boots. Now, they had really, their ankles were basically pressure fit ball joints, so these female action figures could stand like a champ. Part of the reason for that is because they're boot feet, because the vinyl sleeve allowed so much movement, so you could move the ankle into just about any position. So, a lot of us, back in the old days, in the early 2000s, immediately started making our own boot sleeves, which, to begin with, we're just copying the ones that the action figures were originally wearing, which is just two sides, a seam down the front, a seam down the back. But a lot of us started experimenting, and eventually I got to the point, like I said, around 2004, where I was making, I'll just put a picture up. So I can sew that. I'm not worried about making the top of the foot, top of the shoe when it comes to making shoes for dolls. My main hold-up is making the last. That's the shape that a proper shoe is formed around. It's not the straight foot shape. There's room for, it's called the toe box, room for the toes to wiggle around. That's why shoes aren't exactly foot shaped. So once I can figure out how I want to make the last, and usually the book that I had in 2000 that talked about making doll shoes, the way it had you make the last was you would get some alginate, which is a soft casting material, dip the doll's legs in it, just leave it alone, leave the doll like hanging over the cup with the alginate until that sets up. Then pour plaster in, let the plaster set up, get the plaster out of the molds, and then sculpt, I think paper clay was the thing that was suggested, but sculpt the toe box onto the foot forms, and that would make your last, and then you would make the shoes on top of those. So my main hang up is, what do I want to use to cast the feet? I mean, to mold, to copy the feet, to make the foot molds. I'm going to cast it in plaster. I'm not ready to jump into resin because I have a feeling that that's a rabbit hole I could come down and never find my way back out again. So I'm trying to figure out what I can use without ordering a whole bunch of serious hobby amounts of it to make a mold. So I've been looking into, there are ways to make reusable molds with gelatin, unflavored gelatin. Jello, apparently, the sugars and stuff and the dyes make it a little unstable to use, but you can make gelatin and glycerin so it ends up really, really firm, and you can cast things several times on those. And there are other DIY casting materials out there. There's even hot glue, which I'm still exploring my options for that. But once I get that done, I don't feel like I'm going to have a problem making the uppers. So that's where I am with the shoes. But since I have been talking about shoes, I had somebody say, oh hey, I ordered some shoes for my Frightfully Tall Monster High doll, and they were way too big. And the way they were described, I said, oh, those sound like MSD size. And the person said, well, I'll send them to you. I said, well, I would like that, thank you, don't misunderstand, but if somebody else would like them, because MSDs, a lot of dolls are that size, and then, no, I'll send them to you. So they did, and they are MSD size, but they're kind of a clunky, gothy style. So I went ahead and tried them on one of the dolls that I've been having problems finding shoes for, and they actually, I think, again, because it's a clunky style, I think they work pretty well on her. Now her toes only come to like here. And you know, if you've ever had a kid or been a kid trying shoes on, the parents always feel around where your toes are, and it needs to be like a finger length from the end of the, you know, that these shoes are way too big for these feet, technically. But until I get in gear on making shoes, I'm happy with these. So thanks again to Esther Kiriyami for sending these. But now I feel like she needs a more goth outfit overall to go with them. So that was very, and I did get into her head and reposition her eyes. They had a very soft eye putty that I think was kind of not holding up well in the heat we've been having. So her eyes are kind of not aligned. So I got into her and realigned her eyes. I also did that with Delilah Noir, which you might have seen. I repainted Delilah Noir. I stripped off some of her original paint. I showed you last week. I took off her lips and her eyeshadow, but I left everything else in place. And then I went downstairs and I just went at her with the airbrush. I really probably should be using the dual action airbrush. The dual action airbrush not only controls, you know, it's not just on and off with the button on the top, just forward and backward to control how much paint is coming out at any one time. I have my old airbrush, which is single action. I call it the brute force brush because the paint doesn't have to be perfect to get through it. You can spray just about anything through that, which is great for like all over paint. I know she's dyed, but I did do blushing on her. But maybe not so great for face-ups on small faces. But that didn't stop me. And here she is. I'm charitably calling her high color as far as the paint scheme goes. I'm sure most of you know when you're looking at vintage Barbies, and a vintage Barbie has a whole bunch of blush and bright, bright red lips, they call them high color. So I went several layers on her with the airbrush. A opaque red for the lips and blush from the cheeks, and then the translucent fake color shift plaid paint for just kind of enhancing the blush and enhancing the lips. And oh yeah, her lips are really asymmetrical because I did a Silly Putty mask on them. And again, it's a little hot, and the Silly Putty is a little uncooperative when it's so hot. And I didn't have the patience to put it in the refrigerator to cool it off any, so I just put it on her lips, and I thought it looked good enough. And after I took it off, I realized it was a little bit asymmetrical. It's like there's a little more lip on this side than on this side. But you're not going to be that close to her. You're probably not going to be looking at her head on, especially since I put her lovely Queen of Squids in, eyes at an angle. So if she's going to be making eye contact, it will be to the side. So I went over the lips with the iridescent fake color shift and over her blush, and she actually has some body blushing too, but obviously you can't see it through the jumpsuit. And then I took a paint that I'd also used on her. It's, I think, called Christmas Green. It's like a green base with silver in it, and it gives just silver sparkles almost more than it does the green. But I went over her, like blasted her upper lids to have eyeshadow on that, and some of it managed to splotch down onto her face, but it's not too obvious if you're not too close, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. And then I went over everything with this, I turned my airbrush pressure really low. The lower your airbrush pressure, the splotchier the paint comes out. So I turned her paint really low and then went over her with copper, which I also did with her to kind of give a freckle and skin tone. Because apparently when it comes to painting a large doll, I'm going to put a lot of metallic on it. I'm actually thinking the Resin Soul wrong. I like her face up, but I'm thinking I might go at her with the copper too for just more blushing and stuff, because apparently I like sparkly shiny dolls, which I probably should go for her with something sparkly too. And she has her feet crammed into old G.I. Joe shoes, because old G.I. Joe had huge foot. I mean, this is like early 2000s G.I. Joe, but would still have the big huge foot for a while. So not great shoes, but eventually maybe I'll work on that. And then I went to Target to look at Halloween stuff, because last time I was in, actually, now that I think about it, maybe I was in a different Target when they were just starting to set out Halloween stuff. Because this Target, they were still setting it out. Half the aisles back there in the Halloween section were still school supplies, which I like school supplies, but I don't need school supplies. So I went over, since there were no Halloween things to look at, I went over to the doll aisle, and I saw only had one She-Ra, not even She-Ra, Princess Adora left, and they had the BTS dolls, so I got to see, people have been talking about how bad their face paint is, because they're pretty sure it was digitally printed at a kind of low resolution, and it is a little chunky looking, especially on the lips. But then I went to the Barbie section, and they must have just put out a shipper box of the MTM yoga dolls. Sorry. I thought my camera made it sound like it had just turned off, and I thought, no, there should be enough battery, but it was, I don't know what I heard. Anyway, they just put out the MTM yoga dolls, so I finally have a Kirby in this skin tone to match some of the Mackie heads I've been saving for a while, because I love the look of Kirby heads on Mackie bodies. So, I don't know whose head this is. I think Flo gave her to me. Her hair is very distinct. It's strawberry blonde color. It's short in the back. I don't know what the bangs are supposed to do. She has green eyes and a mole. I'm sure if you know what this doll is, she's super distinctive, but I don't, so I can't, it's not clicking. I've been looking on eBay. I figured I could spend all day looking on eBay, so I had to stop to make this video. So I looked on eBay and didn't find her. I'm sure she's from the late 90s, early 2000s, and probably by the time this video is posted, I'll have an answer. But right now, I don't know who she is, so any identification would be appreciated. And I will probably, even if I see how this hair is supposed to look and what the style is supposed to be, I'll probably reroute her. But sometime in the future. So, really all I've done to her was get her out of the box. Trim the horrible flash off of her knees. Their molds must be wearing out. I know a lot of people look at the way the modern, like Generation Girl sculpt is larger and doesn't have a lot of detail compared to the late, 1999, early 2000 Generation Girl sculpt. And they say, oh, it's because the molds are wearing out. That's not what happens when the molds wear out. Molds wear out and flash happens. It bleeds around the edges. There was so much flash on this knee. I took a picture of it before I trimmed it off, but I haven't taken the picture out of my camera yet. Because I live in the old-fashioned days of no phone. I have a camera I have to connect to my computer. Anyway, so molds wear out, flash happens. I think the thing with the Generation Girl is, somebody else pointed out, the less well-defined the eye wells are, the less precise the eye application has to be. I mean, yes, sometimes you see dolls with their eyes in their forehead or their eyes in their cheeks, and that's bad, but if it's off by a few millimeters and there's less definition in the basic sculpt, it doesn't look as bad. So a lot of us are of the opinion that Mattel intentionally reduced the detail and enlarged the old Generation Girl sculpt. So it's not that the molds wear out, it's that the manufacturing process got sloppy. But molds are wearing out on these because there's so much flash. I mean, there's still a little bit of it. You can see where I trimmed it away. Of course, if the camera's focusing and everything. So this is a doll to work on. I mean, I have a lot of dolls I want to root. And I have stuff that I want to sew. For me, I've been working on a jacket for the kiddo. I made a green jacket for him a few years ago, and he wore it to pieces. I mean, I have what's left of it here because I want to double check it against what I'm making. So I managed to thrift. I showed you, I think, a few weeks ago. I managed to thrift another green knit that I can use to make the replacement jacket. I finally started working on the replacement jacket. It's slow going just because it's not a happy fun for me project. And also because it's still 100 degrees outside, so I know he won't need this jacket soon. But I want to get that jacket done, but I already have one of the knits I showed you that I bought last week. I want to make into a jacket using the same pattern. I'm just making the extra small for him and not extra small for me. So I have sewing ideas. I have more stuff to sew for him. I have one of my old hobbies. My primary hobbies are dolls and sewing. Those are my top tier hobbies. And then lower tier hobbies are, I like to make jewelry. Normally if I'm wearing a big loud necklace, it's not this one, normally if I'm wearing a big loud necklace, I made it. But I like to poke around with the sequencer and make music. And I have been kind of, not exactly making music, but I've been going through my old stuff, especially the older, sillier stuff, and I've been putting out to share with some friends online. So I've been doing music stuff lately, a little more than doll stuff. I'm sure that won't last. It's just what my mood has been. And I'll never abandon dolls. I just don't see myself doing much doll in the next week unless I can get my butt in gear and make the last for the shoes. And I can't promise anything, but you know that about me. Thanks for watching.